You know, the atmosphere has changed in Washington. The Tea Party movement certainly sent some new people there. The House has changed a bit. We still have ways. And I understand there's a new senator from Kentucky in Washington, and that's very helpful too. So, and he has a lot of energy. So I'm expecting him to do a whole lot. But it is wonderful. We're very proud of Rand, and I'm so pleased that he was able to come and visit with you today, and we appreciate that very much. But the big question is what are we going to do, and when are we going to do it, and how are we going to accomplish this? And the one thing that we're particularly engaged in, I'm always engaged in education. I think that is important, changing people's mind. Right now we're engaged in a very important political event called the Campaign for the Presidency, and I think it's going rather well right now. And I've used a quote from Sam Adams quite often. I think it's absolutely true. You know, we don't have to have the majority. We need leadership. We need people influencing the majority. But what we need is a minority, an irate minority, a tireless minority, willing to start brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And I think that's what we have been accomplishing. The basic question I think we all have to ask, and that's what we persistently do, and then come up with the right answer: what should the role of government be? And we've had government for as long as we've had recorded history, and basically government has been abuse of power and abuse of the liberties of the individuals. And yet the founders made a stab at it. They didn't like the abuse of the king, and there was a revolution, and we ended up with a rather good document. And this was a major step. Unfortunately, the protections built into the Constitution were ignored, but the ignoring of this is not a consequence of the lack of understanding what it should be. It's the lack of the character of the people over the last 200 years who should have been protecting our liberties rather than diluting those liberties. So our goal, obviously, right now is to restate those principles that have been sound, have given us the maximum amount of freedom and the maximum amount of prosperity of any nation. So there's every reason in the world for us to say that we don't have a catastrophic event because we at least had a hint of what we were supposed to be doing. And I don't like to use the words that we have to go back to doing this, go back to the way it was 200 years ago, back to the gold standard. What we want to do is refine it and march forward and have a better standard than we've ever had before, because there's a greater need than ever before. So that is what I'm optimistic that we can achieve. But in order to decide what the role of government ought to be, we have to decide, what we're trying to do. And to me, it's protecting rights. I think the purpose of all political action, and hopefully our educational activity, that is to promote the cause of liberty. And to do that, you have to understand what it is. And to me, it's pretty simple. I believe that we have a natural or God-given right to our life. And it's your life, and it's your life to do good things or your life to waste, but you have to be responsible for it. But at the same time, if it's your life, it's your liberty, and you should have the incentive under those conditions to be more productive than if you live in a socialist dictatorship. So under those circumstances, we have a natural right to our life. We have a natural right to our liberty. We have the conditions to make us more energetic and produce more, and we ought to have a right to keep everything we earn. We have an entitlement to that ownership. Our problem has been, though, for more than 50 years, probably especially since the Depression, the definition of rights have been distorted. Entitlements have become rights. So if they said that people are entitled, they might fall through the cracks. We have to take care of them. The government has this obligation. So they're entitled, and therefore they have a right to a job and a right to a house and a right to medical care, a right to education. And these aren't rights. These are not rights. The only way governments can deliver those rights is to destroy and take those rights from other individuals. There. There's a bumper sticker on my desk at the office in Washington. I'm sure you may have seen it on the internet, and it's very simple. To summarize it, don't steal, the government hates competition. The government is brute force, and it's violent. Everything they do is either direct violence or a threat of violence. So it's rather ruthless. And the job of the founders was to try to devise a system that this was greatly reduced. So most of the Constitution says that it's a restraint on government, what the federal government can't do. It's not a restraint on the people, and unfortunately we have accepted this fact that there's so many mandates by the government. You know, and it's sad, most Americans still believe we live in a free society, a free country, and we're the freest country in the world, and that's why they hate us, because we're so free. But you know, if you look at what we do to our people, we should raise some questions about just how free we are. You know, we have 5% of the 1% of the population, or 5% of the population. We have the more prisoners than any other country in the world. So we must have. Not so much, I don't think of the American people as being bad people. I think of our government having too many laws telling us what to do. We have 25% of the total world population, prison population, China being second. And it's not for violent crimes. When you think of people now being imprisoned under the Patriot Act, under the drug laws, and think of all the people who have been imprisoned by the EPA for violating some obscure regulations about property rights. And it's really pretty annoying. And if we are to live in a free society, we have to address this overburden of the government regulating everything that we do. In a free society, yes, we have a right to our life. We have no right to another person's life. We have no right to defraud people or steal or hurt people. And if that were the case, this would be a pretty free and prosperous society. But unfortunately, we don't apply that rule that Bastiat talked about. And that is, if you and I live in a society like that, when we can't hurt other people and we can't take their property, why is it that we don't make the government live with that same rule and they can't do anything we can't do? Think of what it would be like if that rule could be applied to the TSA. You know, the TSA sometimes, those agents at the gates do things that if any one of us in this audience did anything that to a stranger, how long would it take for us to be behind bars? So this was my recommendation. I wrote a piece of legislation to this effect that a TSA agent has no more authority to do what they do to the passengers than we have to our neighbors. And this would stop it immediately if they were, suspect. But no, what we do is, unfortunately, and we almost all have to do it. I fly on those airplanes. It's just terrible. And yet, the resistance is going to cause such a calamity. But we have to eventually stand up to this. I mean, I keep thinking, when I see what's happening at the airports and see the pictures of the groping of little kids and older women and grown men, and it just to me is, if we can watch that and see it on our television and accept this as being normal, we're in big trouble. This might be the litmus test, So if the TSA is still doing what they're doing to us today, or even something worse in 5 years from now, believe me, I'm going to become a lot more pessimistic than I am today. Right now, I'm more optimistic because of the number of people who are joining the freedom movement and are looking at this, are getting upset about this and know exactly why we have to curtail the power and scope of government. That's where my optimism comes from, and it comes also from the fact that I meet so many young people in the colleges now studying Austrian free market economics and talking about the Federal Reserve. And also this younger generation, as all of us here, I suppose, we're sick and tired of these wars that are going on that serves none of our benefits at all. I think we're winning this argument, even though you wouldn't know that by some of the audiences and some of the debates going on, but I think the people are listening. I think they're tired of it. I mean, 10 years, don't you think that is enough time for people to transform the Middle East? I say that's enough. It's time not only to bring our troops home from the Middle East, but what about Korea and Vietnam and Germany, and just bring them all home? You know, we can bring the troops home rather quickly. I don't think you can downsize the military overnight, even though we did that after World War II. We downsized rapidly, and we reduced the budget, cut the budget in half, and taxes went down, and we had a pretty good economy after the war finally ended. But even if you just brought all the troops home, just think of all those wages that they're getting. If they spent all that money into the economy, that would be a lot better stimulus than running up the debt even more and have another stimulus package. But we have too many wars going on, not only overseas, that kind of war, but we have the government's committing war against us all the time. And I think about the war on drugs. What good has come from this war on drugs? I detest the use of drugs. I detest the abuse of the so-called illegal drugs. I detest the abuse that has accumulated with the legal drugs, the prescription drugs in this company. We use way too many. And I think we live in a climate today where there's so many psychotropic drugs, and kids especially are put on these too readily. So the drug war in many ways has been a real disaster. You know, it's basically the modern drug war started in the early 70s under that great Republican president, Richard Nixon. He had something to do with getting rid of the gold standard. He's not my favorite president. I want you to know that. But in the last 40 years, we've spent over $1 trillion on prohibition. And I thought we tested prohibition a few years back. You know, it didn't work. And you know, when they prohibited people from drinking alcohol, you know, they kept drinking alcohol. They did. You know, I understand when prohibition went into effect, it took about 1/2 hour for the bootleggers to be bringing booze across the borders. I mean, they were all ready for it. But not only did the criminals sell the booze and cause so much crime and death from that, but then they went to producing alcohol that was less than pure, and people died from that. So, but they rejected the notion that grown-up people have a right to decide what they can do with their own bodies. And the problem there, whether it's drugs or whatever, or personal habits, the assumption is that if you legalize freedom of choice in whatever, that freedom for you to choose something means that those of us who support that position, that we endorse what you do. So I endorse your freedoms, but I'll tell you, I'll bet there's a few in here that use their freedoms in a way I might not want to endorse those freedoms. But no, there can be abuse, but it's sort of like religion. We understand the right of picking and choosing our own religion or no religion. It's not for the government to be involved. But once the government decides that, yes, we're going to allow you to do the things that we sanction, then all of a sudden they get involved. Then they get control of the public school system. Then they wonder who's going to control the curriculum. And there aren't any easy answers for that. It becomes a little less troublesome if your local school board's the highest order of government official to deal with it, and the local people deal with it. But once you get involved with the federal government managing our schools through things like Department of Education, there's no way where you can say you can devise a perfect curriculum. That's why I say we don't need the federal government in. We can start by saving some money by getting rid of the Department of Education.